Let me preface this by stating that almost all of the encounters that I've witnessed have been with at least one other individual. The first two encounters happened on 2 consecutive days in 1997, and the numerous other encounters happened over the span of 90 days, a year and a half ago. I do not recall being abducted. I have filed reports with the incredibly incompetent MUFON. Back in 97, my buddy and I had just finished up our shift at a pizza joint. It was after 11 p.m. We were worn out and wanted to get stoned. We were completely sober. Anyway, we drove out into a cornfield in the off year, so it was full of rye. We were about a half mile off the road. It was pitch black, and because of our vantage point, I could see headlights in any direction for a good mile. We were way out in the country, so no worries. My buddy starts breaking up the weed when I notice what I believe to be truck headlights shine directly from behind, take a hard left, and disappear. My buddy didn't seem to notice, but I became frantic. I thought it was the cops. My friend thinks I am messing with him and continues breaking up some really terrible brick weed. I recall looking at the stars, and one star in particular grabbed my attention. I can't tell you why, but it looked like your average star. Within 30 seconds, this star starts moving up and down, side to side, and in circles. I yelled in a panic, "What the fuck is that?" My buddy gives a dismissive sigh, and then he looks where I'm pointing. For 5 minutes, the UFO continues to move in very fluid movements, making impossible maneuvers, and does so in complete silence. Without notice, this one object becomes 5 equally impressive star-like objects. They stayed close together. At times they moved in some kind of formation, and other times they seemed to move independently. Just as quick as the 5 came, they fused back together as one. We were in shock, but we didn't feel like we were in harm's way. We were recapping what we witnessed, but that single UFO was still there. It wasn't moving much. We thought things were coming to a close, but we were wrong. This time, the one object turned into at least 7 objects. The way they moved and jerked around felt aggressive to me. My friend must have felt the same way because he said he was starting to get nervous. I told him we should go. I embarrassingly confessed that I knew it was there for us, and I became fearful. We haul ass out of there, and the thing follows us to the outskirts of town. The night after the above story, me and the same buddy walked across my apartment complex to go visit a neighbor that was about to grill some burgers. The sun was just starting to set on a humid midsummer afternoon. We knock on the door and my neighbor lets us in. With him was his girlfriend, her sister, and some random guy that I didn't know. I go out back with Ray to chit-chat while he fires up the Kingsford. It's just the two of us, so I take the opportunity to tell him about the previous night. The stars are just starting to come out, and in my storytelling I pointed one out just so Ray would know exactly what I meant. I'm still pretty much tripped out, so I'm fairly excited when describing everything. I'm almost done with my story, and I noticed Ray looking at the stars that are just beginning to appear. I mean, this guy is looking around everywhere. It's like he became instantly paranoid. While I was mid-sentence, Ray points to the northeast and yells, "Like that? Right fucking there?" Holy shit, the goosebumps. He yelled inside for everyone to come out. They did so, and soon after, the same situation as mentioned above starts to occur. That went on for a bit. It went on so long that everyone but Ray and myself went inside. We ate our burgers while watching this. Behind Ray's apartment was a field. 300 yards away on the other side of the field is a tree line and a creek. On the other side of that tree line is another field. This object slowly descends towards the tree line, and I open the door and yell for everyone to come back out. We watch this huge fiery orb in complete silence land on the other side of the tree line. When we lost direct sight of it, we could still see the light through the trees. Right before the light disappeared, it became very bright. We all kept asking each other if it was real. And this part is where I may lose some of you, but screw it. After several minutes and the end of all sunlight, nothing was happening. Everyone was in and out of the house. I remember standing in front of the back door talking to Ray's girlfriend in the kitchen. Ray, my buddy from the previous night, and the girlfriend's sister were outside. My buddy says, "Oh shit," under his breath and darts past me. The sister is right behind him. Ray shoves me in the door and almost falls on top of me. The girlfriend screams, slams the door shut, and locks it. We all back away from the door. After all the what the F was that speak, we decided it was four-legged, covered in brown fur, and tried to attack us. This apartment was a townhouse. We all went upstairs to get a better look, and there it was, in the shadows. It was pacing around and keeping an eye out. This is when they appeared. They came out of the darkness, and they were short at around 3 feet tall. The skin tone was grayish with a bit of Caucasian color. These were short grays, and there were several of them. Meanwhile, the animal thing starts to climb a utility pole. This isn't a typical utility pole. It has 6 or 8 transformers on it, is H-shaped and kind of low. When the beast starts to climb, I watch it shapeshift to a degree. It decides to perch on one of the cross beams. It looks right at us, but its focus seemed to be on the ETs. It acted like a guard dog, for a lack of a better word. The Greys were clothed and they had some sort of instruments. They seemed preoccupied by the field. They would look at us on occasion, but they were doing something. What exactly? I don't know. This went on for hours. Eventually, we all went back downstairs. Every once in a while, I would go check to see if they were gone. And as soon as it was all clear, I ran home. And that was it. For the next 4 years, I pretty much believed it was random. And then after meeting my biological father for the first time, my ex-wife jokingly brings up my UFO stories over dinner and wine. Crazy. I had a very similar experience once. The crazy part is, I don't in any way believe in UFOs. Even after having had the experience, though I have no good explanation of what happened. Read my history if you want. I'm a pretty staunch atheist and I don't tend to believe in something unless there's a good reason to. I don't trust my own experience even if it was corroborated by others, but this one was really hard to shake off. I was riding home through the country one evening, rural Kansas, and had 3 other friends of mine in the vehicle with me. We were totally sober. I feel like that matters. And we were about 20 miles or so outside of town on a country road in the middle of nowhere. It was 11:30 p.m., late enough that there really wasn't any other traffic on the road, but not so late that it was in the middle of the night or anything. I was in the back passenger seat looking out the windows out into this dark farmer's field that has a tree line that paralleled the road. All of a sudden, just behind that tree line, it's about 100 yards from us, I see blue lights flashing behind the tree line, and I turn towards my friend who's driving and tell him to slow down. We pull over to the side of the road and look outwards towards the tree line. At this point, the lights are directly perpendicular to our position on the road, but we were behind the tree line. At first I'm thinking it's an electrical substation blowing up or something, but then the blue lights change and start flashing in all kinds of different colors, becoming more rhythmic and bright, casting God rays through the dust over the tops of the trees. At this point I had stepped out of the car and was watching as the God rays began to descend towards eye level. Whatever it was behind the tree line was rising up towards the top of the trees. At that point my friend starts screaming for us to go, and we jump back in the vehicle and he takes off like a bat out of hell, flying down the road. The lights continued to rise until they were perfectly level with the treetops, and whatever was on the other side starts chasing the car, staying just out of clear view behind the other side of the tree line. My buddy pegged the car out at over 90. It was a family car and not very fast, and the thing kept perfectly alongside us almost the entire way back to town, and then winked out just before we got there. We talked about it for an hour at a gas station just inside of town, and then decided that we wanted to go back out and see if we could find whatever it was we had seen. But this time we took dirt roads that paralleled the country road, so we'd be on the other side of the tree line. When we got back out there, we saw fire trucks all over the place, driving slowly with spotlights aimed at the fields looking for something. They were canvassing a large area covering about 3 miles. I called the fire department to ask them about it the next day, and they said they had gotten reports of lights or fires from several people over a large area, but that they were unable to find anything. To this day, I have no idea what we saw. When I was around 7 years old, I was raised primarily at the time by my grandparents who lived in a rural county in East Texas. I'll never forget one day when we had a most unusual man come by the house one afternoon unexpectedly. I remember there being a knock at the door as I was playing in the living room at the time and called up to announce to my grandparents someone was at the door. My grandmother took a quick peek out the front window before answering the door, and I remember glimpsing at a very dark colored or black sedan, unsure of the type, parked outside. Thinking back, I find it odd at the time I couldn't recall hearing it pull up, as I had been playing near that window for some time. My grandmother answered the door, and to the best of my recollection, the man revealed himself to be some sort of door-to-door salesman. My grandmother invited him in and called for my grandfather. I never in my life had seen a man so pale. He was dressed in essentially all black, or very dark blue suit, with a matching hat and initially large sunglasses, which initially made me wonder if he wasn't blind. They reminded me of that type, and one of the saddest excuses for a toupee I've yet to bear witness to. I was totally transfixed on the man and couldn't get over the stark contrast of his pale skin to his seemingly drawn-on lipstick with pinkish lips. My fixation became apparent, and my grandmother shooed me into a back room as to leave the men to talk, so to speak, uninterrupted. Throughout the visit, I kept trying to sneak peeks at the man and commented to my grandmother whether or not she thought he was sick and he was so pale and thin. Eventually, I suppose he finished his pitch and eventually made his way quite slowly for an exit. I recall as he was leaving, he seemingly thanked both my grandparents. I couldn't make out everything that was said, but I recall he did something more odd than his appearance. He seemed to pass his hands in front of both my grandparents' faces and said something to both, but all I could make out was the word forget, and soon was on his way. My grandparents seemed to be momentarily in a dull fog after closing the door and quietly pulling off. I never saw him drive off. I immediately asked them who was that man, and they looked at each other and said, "What man?" Now, as you can understand, all three of us were quite baffled then, as having no recollection of a visitor, and me having no rational explanation as how in the hell they couldn't remember that frickin' wackadoo looking salesman. I went on for weeks asking them who the man was and trying to jog their memory, and as always they said there was no one. They even went as far as to say I was mixing up another business acquaintance of my grandfather and had him drop by one day, but I assured them there was no way I could confuse the two, as the man in question was paler than Golem in the LOTR trilogy, and their friend was nothing of the sort. I had almost forgot about the incident entirely until watching a show on SYFY related to a MIB theme, and it came back to me. As recent as a year ago, I tried to bring it up again when I was home visiting, and my grandfather didn't remember a thing, while my grandmother again didn't recall the strange man, but vividly remembers me asking for weeks on end about a strange man, and neither of them ever remembered setting foot in the house. This happened back in the mid-80s, and I'm in my early 30s now looking back, and a lot of the details aren't as crisp, but I know what I saw. "1994, late August, twilight. I and 4 friends were up in Westwood Hills, a public park on the west side of the Napa Valley, above the town of Napa, California. We were all sober, looking east out over the valley. The sun had just set. A huge bright green fireball approximately 20 to 30 miles away to the east came down on a sloping trajectory at about 30 degrees, passing behind the east hills on the other side of the valley before it landed. It looked like it was at least as big as a football field. It was not moving fast like a meteor or shooting star, rather at about the speed of a prop plane. It definitely appeared to be on fire. There was no sound when it landed that we could hear, but there was a visible green flash that we could see against the mountainsides. From what we could tell, it landed a bit northwest of the town of Fairfield, California. We all saw it, and we were all amazed at the color and the size, and that it had been moving so slowly. We watched it for about 2 minutes before it landed. Nothing more happened. Nothing was reported in the papers that we could find. And after talking about it for the rest of summer, we pretty much went on about our lives. Then, I happened across this news story about 10 years later. Crop circles started appearing in Fairfield. I would say this happened maybe 1996. I was about 8 years old. It was getting dark out, but the sky wasn't totally black, like a deep blue. You could make out the clouds fairly easily still and couldn't see many stars yet. We had a large sunroom with lots of big windows, and I was sitting on the floor playing with my Legos. Occasionally I'd get up and walk around or just move around, because little kids can't sit still and don't keep their attention very well. I'd gotten up for a 3rd or 4th time when something outside caught my attention. It was up in the sky, but like I said earlier, it wasn't dark outside yet. I could make out a shape still, like a large triangle with rounded sides. It wasn't moving very quickly and didn't seem to be making any noise, other than a very faint and low rumbling. It was more of a sensation than anything. There were pink lights on the 3 corners that were flickering in a sequence. Left, top, right, left, top, right. There was one light in the middle that faded in and out slowly and was a very, very bright white. It would seem pretty odd for a plane to have lights like that, or for one to be shaped like this. I watched for maybe a good 10 to 15 seconds before it completely vanished. It didn't fly away or move or anything. It was like hiding a layer in a Photoshop, completely gone. I had ran and told my mother, and I don't know if she was just humoring me or actually believed me, but she came out and looked up in the sky with me, and of course there was nothing there. I have a few other stories like this from when I was younger. I haven't seen anything notable in the skies recently. A couple of years ago, I was in central Arizona with a couple of friends driving out on some Forest Service roads around 9 p.m. or so. We stopped at this giant boulder, just sort of jutting out of the ground, and climbed up to sit and enjoy the desert view for a bit. We're sitting there, talking, when I noticed this weird orange light, looking like a bright star out in the sky. At first it's just sitting in one spot, but then it starts moving around fast as hell in all sorts of directions. Just like your typical UFO dancing lights phenomenon you'd see in a hoax video. I can't quite remember how it showed up, whether it just appeared or flew into view, but a second identical light showed up, and these things just started looping and darting around in the sky. At first we chalked it up to some people flying quadcopters, as they were the only thing I've ever seen dart around like that. However, as quiet as we could be, we couldn't hear so much as a low hum. It was dead silent out there. Mind you, I grew up in central MD right under the flight paths for BWI Airport, so I know planes, what they look like, how bright they are, and the weird optical illusions you'll see from them flying through haze and clouds. At this point, we had all lived in Arizona for a few years, so we were all familiar with satellites and how they look. The distances these lights seem to be covering. Picture your horizon as a circle. I'd say they were going back and forth across a distance of about 1/6 of that circle, all while appearing to be on a distant plane. Combined with the total silence, ruled out quadcopters. They pretty much just danced around for a few minutes before they both shot off in one direction, extremely fast, and faded away in the blink of an eye. I don't know what to tell you. I honestly have no idea what they were. The grand reaction we all had was turning to each other afterwards and saying, "Well, what in the hell was that?" If you've gotten this far, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. Please like and subscribe if you like my content. Thank you.